Good evening, everyone. Good evening. And welcome to U.S. Technology Leadership Council. Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Cerf. And it's a pleasure to welcome you here and here to welcome us to the facility and to the Potomac Institute for Policy Studies. You have as a repeat speakers, Dr. Eric Haseltine and Dr. Chris Gilbert. This is officially a book signing, and what's remarkable about this book, which I read the whole thing. You know, it took me an hour or two or three, but a remarkable book in that it highlights a number of highly accomplished, highly decorated entrepreneurs, innovators who worked through their bureaucracies in order to make things happen. And a large percentage of the people highlighted in that book are here this evening. And with that, Dr. Haseltine and Dr. Gilbert.
Thank you. Well, thank you so much. First of all, thank you, Dr. Buss. Let's kick it off.
So I'm going to kick it off with a question. How many of you have worked under a monster bureaucracy?
Show of hands.
Show of hands.
Well, we asked the question because, as you might have gathered from the introduction, I too have worked in monster bureaucracies in the government and industry. And that's the way I always thought of them, as a monster. And the thing about monsters is that they are very powerful, and they famously chew up and spit out something that rhymes with spit anyhow, innovating and innovation. And we all know this, that big bureaucracy and innovation seem oxymoronic, but we're here to tell you that they're not. And the clues can be seen by actually looking at the cover of our book.
Yes. So you see on the cover of our book, we've got a monster with lots of teeth, big teeth. And those teeth, you don't want to be in front of them because they can chew everything that's in front of them. They're very dangerous. So ideally, you want to be as far away from those teeth as possible, and ideally behind the monsters so that the teeth cannot get to you. And you see here the little guy is behind the neck of the monster, so the man can steer the monster and not be eaten by the monster.
So here's the thing. You can't fight a monster. You can't go at it frontally because those teeth will eat you and those claws will tear you apart. And yes, it's wearing a suit and tie, but it will kick you to death with those polished shoes too. You can't fight the monster, but you can do something else. And our motto, which kind of is the bottom line up front of the whole book, is ride it, don't fight it. So with that, speaking of rides.
So here you see on the left is an innovation, which is beautiful. It's a Ferrari, the red Ferrari, but where is it? It's on top of a mountain with snow and ice all around it. It's got nowhere to go. But on the right, you see that there are roads, and now the innovation has a lot of places to go. The Ferrari has a lot of places to go. So we said that relationships are for innovations, what roads are for Ferraris. Without relationships, there's nowhere the innovations will go. But with roads, innovations can go lots of places.
Yeah, so this is the USTLC, the U.S. Technology Leadership Conference. So let's talk about technology. I started in the business at Hughes Aircraft in 1979. And as engineers, we were taught that if you invent something kick-ass that is needed, and it works, and it's affordable, and it's practical and portable, you win. Right or wrong? Wrong.
Does anybody know about it?
Yeah, well, so, kind of what we thought was 90% of getting a kick-ass innovation across the finish line was invention of something good and practical and affordable. And that there was about 10% of everything else, which were what all the BD people did in the marketing and contracts and all that squishy stuff. Well, now I'm 69, about to turn more than 69, and I know better. And what I now believe is that the technology getting it right is almost a rounding error. That it's really about everything else. And what is that everything else? That everything else is about changing human behavior. Think about some of the top innovations that people talk about: the iPhone, the Tesla, the mRNA virus, about which we will hear more tonight from Dr. Gilbert. Each and every one of those things required a human or many humans to change their behavior. You had to stop talking on a old style phone and go on this smart thing with the screen with no buttons at all. That was a behavior change. You had to trust an engine that you'd never trusted before, except in a golf cart. And you had to trust a type of vaccine, let's say, that had never been tried before. So really, innovators are not in the business of innovation. They are not in the business of technology. They are in the business of changing human behavior. And that is what the everything else is about. So when you look at this cartoon, as we see here, notice the person with all that hair? That's
Yes,
me.
that's the inventor. On the left is the inventor and lots of hair, but just like Eric, but he's got a little bit less hair, not as much.
Yes.
You notice, but
And so, in my whole career and in many of your careers, you basically work in the department of change, right? To improve things, to make things better. But there's always someone there with a bow tie. It's got to be a bow tie. Yes. Yes.
yes.
Yes. With a short haircut. That's it. And we're going to get to that later. That was a great lead up.
Yes.
But that guy on the left, put your glasses on.
Yeah.
Come on.
No, I've got a real tie.
Okay.
But the point is that, you can drag people or push people kicking and screaming. But it's like that old adage, how many psychologists does it take to change a light bulb?
Yeah, only one, but the light bulb needs to want to be changed.
There you
right?
go.
Want to be changed.
And so that's the point. And so how do you do it? How do you change human behavior where humans really don't want to change? Right? And that's kind of the theme. I mean, if I had to go back and tell every engineer I've ever worked with the business they were really in, or any scientists that I've ever worked with, the business they're really in, I'd say, you are in the business of behavior change. And if you don't get that, you might as well go into being a quant on Wall Street.
And this picture shows the connection between behavior change and relationships. Imagine these two, instead of having the relationship you see here, had a relationship of trust and respect.
So now we're going to, speaking of the mRNA virus, the vaccine,
Vaccine.
Dr. Gilbert.
Well, talking about relationships and how relationships are important to innovations, I'm going to take the example of Katalin Karikó. I don't know if most of you maybe don't know her name. She is the inventor of the messenger RNA. And the messenger RNA is what is used now for the vaccine, the coronavirus vaccine, that has been so spectacular and so instrumental in stopping or in slowing down this pandemic. But how did she start? She started, she was born in 1955, and in Hungary, in a little house that has no running water, no refrigerator, and no television. And her dad was a butcher. And she became interested in biology by looking at her dad opening pigs and taking the organs out of the pigs. And she said, I'm going to become a biologist. She studied biology in Hungary, got a PhD there. And her big revelation was, we can do with, we don't have to change the DNA of people. We can just inject a little RNA, which is the messenger that will tell the cells to make a certain protein. And if we manage to do that, we can tell the cells to make any protein we want. People don't have insulin, we're going to tell the cells to make insulin. people are lacking an enzyme, we can tell the cells to make an enzyme. So she really believed in that, but her lab ran out of funding. No more money. She lost her job. She applied for a postdoc fellowship in the United States. She went to the Temple University in Philadelphia. Then she went to University of Pennsylvania. She got a postdoc fellowship and she applied for grants for the mRNA. And out of all the grants, nobody would give her a grant. At one point, there were 7 people applying for grants. Out of them, 6 got a grant. The only one that did not get a grant was her. And
So they took it for granted.
thank you, Colin. And this went nowhere until there was a chance encounter. That's why relationships are so important. At a Xerox machine at University of Pennsylvania, she was waiting to make copies and she met Dr. Drew Weissman, who was an MD, PhD immunologist. And they started talking. She said, I cannot get funding for my mRNA. He said, I'm doing studies on trying to make vaccines using DNA. And she said, well, maybe I can make an mRNA for you, for your vaccine. And he said, really? And he hired her in his lab just because of that chance encounter. After like almost 20 years of her trying to do something with the mRNA. They got a company together, which was called RRNA RX, and they tried to get investors. They could not get any investor and she knew she could make the mRNA at that point. She could show in mice it would create protein. Nobody wanted to invest. Until another chance meeting, she met at a lecture she gave. She met Dr. Ugur Sahin, who's the CEO of BioNTech. And Dr. Sahin hired her right away. He knew that was wonderful, that was spectacular. And that's at the origin of our Pfizer vaccine, Pfizer BioNTech, and the Moderna vaccine, the most spectacular vaccines in the whole world for this pandemic, because of those 2 chance encounters. Otherwise, it was 40 years of work for Dr. Carico, and nothing would have happened without those chance encounters. That's an example of relationships.
So big bureaucracies of the University of Pennsylvania, big pharma, big formalities, didn't get us much. Chance encounter at Xerox machine, and probably everyone in this room is benefited. All right. So all of you probably recognize the young gentleman there on the right. That's Steve Wozniak and Steve Jobs. You probably didn't know about Fernandez there, who is sitting there on the left. And here's what happened.
Let's show them that.
Oh,
We're good.
No. You can see it?
They see this.
They see it. Yeah. Okay. All right. So what happened was Steve Jobs was a high school kid in the San Jose area, Cupertino. And he was friends with Fernandez, who was also friends with this freshman at UC Berkeley, probably the best university ever in all history.
Big cow.
Yeah. And so, but he did drop out. He did drop out after 1 year, but he was very interested in cars. And so Steve Wozniak is washing his car one day. And of course, Fernandez took, Jobs for a walk and introduced him and thought they'd get along. And they did kind of hit it off, and they were interested not so much in computers per se, but in hobbyists. So they wanted to come up with a computer kit for hobbyists. And that's actually what the Apple I was. It was something that you, a consumer, would buy the parts and you put it together. And the rest, as they say, is history. But it didn't start in IBM. It didn't start in Sperry or Univac. It didn't start in any of those big bureaucracies. It didn't start in any formal way. It started with an introduction over soap over a car.
So now, I'm going to talk about another relationship. And the man at the bottom left is Dr. Avram Hershko. So Dr. Hershko was born in Hungary also, and just like Katalin Karikó, and he migrated to Israel at the age of 13 with his family. And in Israel, he got his MD and PhD and was interested in cancer research. And that again, so that's a chance encounter at a conference in the US on cancer research that he met Dr. Erwin Rose. And Dr. Erwin, and I was in between meetings. And that led to a friendship. Dr. Erwin Rose got hired Dr. Avram Hershko for 1 year. And that led to a new treatment for cancer, which is called the proteasome degradation inhibitor, which is wonderful for multiple myeloma. And that led to a Nobel Prize in chemistry in 2004. So again, that's a chance encounter that got those two people together, leading to a Nobel Prize in chemistry. And afterwards, there was another story where Fred Cohen was a wealthy pharmacist that invested in the company, and he was diagnosed with bladder cancer. And Avram Hershko managed to get him cured with finding a treatment for him. And also, Dr. Hershko's best friend, Dr. Goldman, got diagnosed with multiple myeloma soon afterwards and was treated with the new invention from Dr. Hershko, and that treated him very well. So again, another story of relationships.
And what we like the best is the quote there.
What Glenn Ross said. He said, and I quote, "For international collaboration to truly succeed, the people involved must care about each other as much as they care about science." And now, next slide.
Now that says international, but would you generalize that to any?
And yes, and that's the point, that it's really, and I think Gary said it earlier, it's about trust. That we do the most amazing things with people we like and we trust. And without that, it's very difficult. And we'll get into that a little bit more later when we get into the psychology of innovation. But suffice it to say, you know, we hit this theme over and over again in the book of just how important informality is. And it's kind of a bottom line conclusion that seems paradoxical, but the role of leadership in fostering innovation of formal leaders is to foster the informal. And this is a story that Steve Nixon, who is sitting here, welcome Steve and his wife Nancy. Steve knows this story very well. Steve and I had the misfortune of being the first leaders of science and technology for the US intelligence community. I was kind of the hood ornament and Steve did all the work. And what we realized right away was our job was to make 1 + 1 = 3 instead of 1 + 1 = -100. And we thought a lot about how to do this. So I think it was Steve talking to Mike Macedonia, who came up with this idea of a intelligence, science, and technology fellows program. It was a MacArthur grant type of program where D&I gave $200,000 to the top S&T professional in each intelligence agency every year. And we asked for no reports. We asked for no deliverables. We just said, hey, we want to hang out with you 4 times a year and have you talk to each other. And so people were very suspicious. CIA, for one, says free money. What's going on here? But they couldn't find anything wrong with it. And so they took our money. And at one of the trips, what we would do is we'd take them around the world to exotic places. And one of those places served room temperature ale with lots of big golf balls around. You might know where that is. And, you know, by this time, we had realized that everybody hated D&I. They probably still do. And so we were not very popular people, even though they liked our money and they took it. And so we had to be kind of subtle about what we were trying to do. So one of the things we did is at this facility, we made the bus 3 hours late on purpose. We talked to the bus driver and said, you got really bad engine trouble. He goes, no, I don't. I go, yeah, you do. And so what happened was we just happened to arrange for there to be beer there that was left over from a previous conference. Ale, excuse me. And lots of fish and chips and all that kind of stuff that in this place. And I said, while we're here waiting for the bus to arrive, every morning I sit down with John Negroponte, who's just briefed the president. And he comes to us and he says, the boss is not happy because hard target X, we got squat, nothing. And can anybody help? So I said, look, this is a major national security issue. The president is beating on my boss every day to get stuff on this target. Any of you got any ideas? 45 minutes later, they had solved it. No money, no staff, no nothing. And we started within a few short weeks delivering very high quality intelligence. And it was all because everybody was sitting together around booze, and it was England, so the food wasn't that good, but the ale was good. And the thing was, it was an environment where there was psychological safety. And the sociologist who coined that term defines it as the ability to relax, let down your guard, and take risk. So this is where we get back to why relationships are so important to changing human behavior. Because without a relationship, you don't trust. Without trust, you don't risk. Without risk, you don't change. That's it. That's the whole story. So next slide.
yeah, in big bureaucracy, I mean, you cannot talk. You cannot. If you say something, people might say that you're not good. You're not good enough. So you don't dare saying what you think, what you really think. But in between friends, you're going to say exactly what you think, because you're going to be they will trust you, they will hear you, they will try to help you, and there is collaboration, and then you put a little bit of good food, lots of good alcohol, and then everybody works together, and it's just wonderful what can happen with the inventions.
Yeah, and I do think the booze was really important to making this happen. But that is a, what did you say is a C story? That really happened, Gary. Go ahead.
That's another example of relationships. It's the origin of Wikipedia. So on the left, you've got Larry Sanger. On the right, you've got Ben Kovitz. And they were friends. They were already friends. And they were used to meeting at a taco stand north of San Diego, and which is now an Italian restaurant. We went there with Eric. And Larry Sanger was an editor at Nupedia. But they were really getting nowhere. He had trouble getting enough content. It was not scaling. And Ben said that he was working on a wiki, and he was letting zillions of different people add the stuff themselves and edit the stuff themselves. So Larry took the idea to his boss, and they opened up Nupedia to the public, and they made it collaborative, and poof, Wikipedia was born, just because that friendship was there and the advice was there.
And speaking of informality, Ben Kovitz said the Mexican restaurant didn't even have a name other than Mexican restaurant. And that actually is kind of the way Wikipedia got started. And it wasn't, again, a big bureaucracy, wasn't anything like that. It was over tacos. Next slide, please.
Next slide.
Oh,
Yes.
well.
All right.
So I think some of you might recognize this character. And we said it last night, but they're not going to pull the real name out of me tonight. So there is a story here, and then we're going to turn it over to Brian to kind of let him talk a little bit about his story and why it resonates with the theme that we're talking about. But we asked for a very big name person who all of you know to endorse the book and do a one-sentence blurb. And he declined to do it because he said that the people that we gave credit in the book really shouldn't have gotten the credit for the things that we said they did, which is the height of irony, because the whole title of the chapter is give the monster all the credit and stay in the background, right? And so the irony is that Brian was very instrumental in Constant Hawk. A lot of you know about it. And he, on purpose, hid his involvement in it, so much so that people who should know better didn't know better. Brian?
And I think his name should be the catalyzer. he catalyzes.
Yeah, oh, the meat tenderizer,
No,
yeah,
no,
we'll
no, the
get to that.
catalyzer.
I like that better than.
The
than
You know,
catalyzer.
you
meat
can
tenderizer.
put meat tenderizer in a lubricant.
There you go, there you go.
So go ahead.
And what aspect of it would you like me to discuss?
Well, I think you've heard the theme.
Yeah.
But, really, we learned at the knee of the master, one of the masters.
Not
And,
at all.
the importance of the informal, the importance of relationship, the importance of the lubrication of food and booze.
Right.
And
And
so,
you actually set me up better last night when we talked about the Thursday night meetings, which was the informal structure of which Constant Hawk and some of the other projects came out of. And it had many of the same attributes you've talked about here. It had, good people, booze, good food, and a hard problem. And the Thursday night meetings were called exactly that because they occurred in a skiff after hours where people weren't called back to the Pentagon. We usually had the person there that owned the problem, and then some people we thought that could help solve the problem. And in that non-attribution, not caring about who gets the credit environment, which is the mantra of one of our special operations groups, we were really able to get a lot done.
yeah. Yeah, and I really want to say that some of the stories that you heard about, for example, D&I and how Stephen Knight Nixon and I operated, we kind of, I guess you were guilty of anticipatory plagiarism, and that you invented all these ideas that were ours.
There you go.
You had them first, but now they're ours.
The father of successes have many fathers.
Yes, that's right. That's right. So anyhow, thank you for your service. Brian is now a venture capitalist, and so now it's
A
okay.
budding venture
A budding venture capitalist. Where staying under the radar is much less important. But it is really true that a lot can be done if you don't care who gets the credit. In fact, if you consciously give credit to other people, that is a way to build trust because they know you're not going to steal all the credit. And it's a way to build relationships. And without that, you're not going to get anywhere.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Next one.
Next
Moving
slide.
right along.
Oh,
Talk about Gary Sojka. So Gary Sojka is on chapter 4, our main person. So there are some people on Zoom who don't know Gary Sojka. So I'm going to tell a little bit about him before, and then you can come and tell a few words, Gary. So Gary is the partner and co-founder of the Potomac Advocates, and also partner and co-founder of Prasam LLC. And he represents defense companies, intelligence, electronic and transportation companies before the executive and legislative branches. And his specialty is that he brings mid-level government employees together with mid-level technology people and speakers like congressmen, senators, and cabinet level officials. And Gary was very instrumental in the creation of IARPA in 2008, and that's what a lot of people don't know about. So Gary, can you come up and talk a few words?
Yes, while he's on the way up, Steve Nixon and I like to think that we were responsible for IARPA. And in a sense, we had a role to play. And actually, Steve Nixon, if you want to come up and comment on it too, I actually didn't know Gary Sojka's role in the creation of IARPA. And I don't know whether, Steve, you didn't tell me on purpose or you just
He was a
omitted
sly
to, or you
devil.
told me and I didn't.
Yeah.
Yeah, come on up here. But this is kind of how the Intelligence Advanced Research Project activity really got started, not the official history that you've heard. So you guys were part of it. Why don't you go ahead and tell the story?
Okay, so reality is you need to create teammates. They need to think that you're credible. They need to like you. They need to trust you. You need to have energy. In the chapter about me, it's about I having created an ecosystem that could accomplish something because I did not rely on one person. The real hero of this chapter is this guy right here. All right. And the reason why is if you really ignore what the chapter says about me and what it says about him, it's I had an idea. It just might work. And he came in contact, he came back to, we knew each other from the Hill. He knew what I had created. He took advantage of it. So first he took advantage of it. Secondly, he supplemented it by working an additional person, which was part of the Maryland delegation, you know, Congressman Rose and Josh Hartman, who you and I both know.
Dutch
And-
Rupertsberger.
Yeah, and
then
and
Marvin
Mikulski.
Mikulski
Yeah,
got
and-
involved,
and we
but I
worked-
believe it was all about the Capitol Grill.
Well, it was.
You know,
It-
Bob
it
Hummel,
was.
we need Bob Hummel to come up and shut up, Bob. Hummel.
Yeah, but the point of the matter is that it required a team in order to make this happen. It also required somebody who was clever enough to say, I'm being attacked, and how do I checkmate it? Now, this is very interesting. Government people are really not supposed to lobby the Hill, but it happens all the time. And a whole bunch of government people are checkmated because they don't do it. Now, there are entrepreneurial groups, DARPA being the most famous. I mean, those people will lobby Hill all the time. I will not tell you about a famous DARPA director in every year, because, you know, within the government, what you would have is a situation where you were allowed to have a CETA contractor hire somebody to track what was going on in government. They would go to the hearings and stuff like that, but they had no impact. So I would get to tell every year, you know, Gary, I can't tell you to do this, and I can't pay you. But you know, it's really in the national interest and you ought to consider it. So why don't you come here? Then you make your decision as to whether or not you want to take care of these issues or not. Every year I did that for close to, with two DARPA directors for close to 12 years. And I had office directors and program managers do that because they were entrepreneurial and they knew they needed a team. And so they would work that. Steve knew he needed a team. He wasn't going to get this done without a team. And so that team is a tool. It's not the entire part of innovation, but it's a tool.
Yeah.
Thank you,
Thank you
Steve,
very much.
and thank you, Gary.
Yeah, thank you.
So can we have the next slide? Okay, Mike Goslin. Well, let me introduce Mike. You know, there's an old adage, be careful who you step on the way up, because you're sure as hell going to meet him on the way down. Well, that happened to me. Mike Goslin used to work for me when I was EVP at Disney. And then when I left the government, I went to work for Disney. And who did I work for? But Mike Goslin. And Mike, I would like you, if you would, to tell the story of Mirage and how it kind of resonates with the theme of informality in relationships.
Oh, geez. So, I mean, I guess just to give some context, Mirage was, the idea was we wanted to create a real lightsaber that looked like it does in the Star Wars movies, because that would just blow fans' minds, was the idea. And the way we went about it was, we thought augmented reality, that's the way to create this experience. And so what started as kind of a lightsaber became a whole augmented reality system. And that's not the kind of thing that a company like Disney typically builds. And so we had to follow this meandering path of proving that it was a real thing that could actually be done, and then finding the way to actually get it built that relied on all the things in Eric's books, you know, relationships between people in different companies or different parts of these massive companies, chance encounters, good luck, good timing, tailwind, everything. Somehow we managed to stitch the pieces together in the right way to bring this thing to market. And it was a huge success. I mean, we did something that nobody had seen before. We did it at a good price point. We of course had the Star Wars intellectual property to back it up. I think it's a great illustration of innovation in the margins, in the cracks, relying on relationships and informal ties, and real breakthroughs coming from unexpected quarters. I don't know if you want to add anything to that, Eric. I think that's kind of the high level story, though.
Yeah, I think that a couple of things I want to point out as to how our group got started. A group got started when I was in the office of the CEO of Disney at the time, Bob Iger. And I met with him once a quarter to talk about the future and filling the white spaces of the Walt Disney Company. And after a while, I decided that PowerPoint wasn't going to do it. So I actually built stuff and said, here's the future, and had him try it. And he saw one thing that I did, and he said, I want you to take that to Bob Chapek, who curiously enough is now the CEO of the Walt Disney Company. And Chapek saw that. He was in charge of the consumer products group, and he goes, whoa, who did that? I said, I did it. He said, where did you do it? I said, in my garage. He said, no shit. I said, yeah. He said, I want you to come work with us, because that's the culture we need that we don't have. So I started this group, and we brought in Mike Goslin, who then later took over the group. And I just kind of went off to the side working on geeky stuff. And Mike did all the heavy lifting. But that was kind of the point. And we talk about Bob Chapek in there as something new at the Mouse, because he understood that they had this stultified culture. Like every successful enterprise, their success carries the seeds of its own demise. And he gets that. So he was the one really that was the wind at our back. Next, Mike, thank you so much for coming.
Thank you, Mike.
Oh, sure. Thank you.
Okay. Next slide. Okay.
So it's the story of Steve Crocker and Vint Cerf. We're going to. So we show in that this is chapter 2. There are the origin of the whole internet. This is how the internet got started, with a request for comment number 1 way back in 1969. And how did it start? Through a series of informally organized meetings in a Chinese restaurant, Sichuan restaurant, called the Little Garden. But so you were about come up, Vint. So you were about 12 grad students that were trying to have the 4 computers to communicate with each other. So go ahead.
Well, look, first of all, thank you. I really appreciate all the stories that everybody told, and I like the second story thing. Let me tell you the second story, in fact, I was embarrassed in 1997 at the White House when Hillary Clinton and Bill Clinton were doing the Millennium Evenings, leading up to 2000, Y2K. And Hillary told this story, and I had no idea where the hell she had found out about it. Steve Crocker had gotten permission while we were still in high school to use the computers at UCLA. And one evening we went there and we discovered that the door was locked. Now we had permission, so it's not like we were doing, but the door was locked. But I noticed that the second floor window was open. And so as the way Crocker tells the story is he says, we're not really going to do this, are we? And I said, bend down. And I climbed up on his shoulders, which I've done for decades now, standing on his shoulders, and got into the second story window and went out and, taped the door so we could open and close it. Now, Steve says many years later, after he was at ARPA, and then, the break-in happens at the Watergate.
Yeah.
And they taped the door and all that, and there's sort of he says a frisson, I don't know if he uses a French word or not, but a chill ran down his spine, thinking, holy cow, we might have been caught. But we weren't. So and that's really a story of 2 guys that met in high school and have been friends ever since. So we're talking from 1959 to the present. And we've had the pleasure of working together all those years, off and on, sometimes very intensely and sometimes not so much. But Steve has the properties that are needed in order to make things happen without forcing them. So it starts with respect. And that's starting out respecting other people's opinions. Steve deliberately not only exhibited, but is truly a humble person and gives respect to other people who have good ideas. But it works best first when you have respect for other people, then and you have common goals. And Steve was determined to try to solve the problem of getting heterogeneous machines to talk to each other across a homogeneous network. Now, the ARPANET project was started by DARPA. And you don't need the whole story. You can read Where Wizards Stay Up Late. You can read Gene Abate's Inventing the Internet to get some of the background, or even a brief history of the Internet at the Internet Society. But the project was DARPA's project. They paid both Baranek and Newman to build the packet switches that formed the Internet. But then they didn't know what to do about getting the computers to talk to each other. Oh, that's a job for the graduate students. So Crocker led the network working group, and that was the informal group of a dozen of us from a dozen universities, scratching our heads saying, holy crap, every single one of these machines is different. It's a different brand of machine, running different operating systems. How the hell are we going to get them to communicate usefully across this uniform network? So Steve was responsible for developing the host-to-host protocol, which allowed that to happen. And he did it without driving people. He simply he brought some guys in from France. He brought the dozen of us scattered around and simply pushed at the problem, poked around and built stuff and tried it out. And so one of the biggest lessons I found from that whole relationship was you don't know anything until you actually try to do it. And that's when you discover when your ideas don't work. So I got respect, common goals, and humility, collaboration. This was about respecting other people's ideas and creating a framework where they could contribute in a useful way. Risk-taking. I don't know if this is going to work. Let's try it. Now, Steve said he kept thinking that the principal investigators were eventually going to come in and tell us what to do. But they didn't. And so we were left to our own devices. And one of the guys at ARPA, Barry Wessler, decided that instead of principal investigator meetings, which were the usual thing, he decided to leave the principal investigators out and bring the graduate students together. So about a couple hundred of us showed up in Allerton, Pennsylvania for 3 days. I can tell you that those 3 days cemented relationships that have lasted decades. So we're back to relationships again. Just a couple of other things to tell you, though, that I've learned, lessons I've learned from the internet part of this story. Steve led the work on getting the ARPANET to go and be useful with all the host-to-host applications and things like that. And then Bob Kahn comes along and says, well, now we can use computers for command and control. Except that means they have to be in mobile vehicles, ships at sea, and airplanes. And we built the ARPANET out of dedicated telephone circuits connecting the packet switches to each other. And that's not going to work. The tanks are going to run over the wires and they're going to break. The airplanes will never make it up the tarmac and the ships will get all tangled up. So he came to my lab at Stanford in '73 and said, we need to figure out how to build mobile packet radio and packet satellite to go along with the ARPANET. So that was the origins of the internet. But what I learned very quickly in trying to pursue that was that if you didn't learn how to sell your ideas to other people, you weren't going to go anywhere, because you can't do anything big without getting a lot of help. And so I discovered early on in my engineering career that the most important thing I could do is to learn how to sell my ideas so I could get other people to do what I needed to get done. And also, it doesn't hurt if you find people who are smarter than you are. And now that wasn't hard in my case, because that's a fairly low bar. But no, it really, no, I'm not, that's not false modesty. It's really true. There are a lot of people who are incredibly smarter than I am, including Steve. So I think that the most important thing I can leave you with, because I know you don't want me to go on and on here, is to say that Steve's style was to basically demand of us that in the most gentle possible way, to do better and to solve problems. And then from my point of view, that is what inspired everybody, because we didn't want to disappoint him. And that's a hell of a way to lead
Because of the
people.
relationship.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
that's a-
So he deserves a lot of credit. He is, has not gotten the visibility he should have. So I'm really glad to see.
And of course, I believe he had intended on being here, but
Weather.
Yeah.
The weather gods.
The
did
weather,
not-
the weather,
yes.
he got
He
hung up
will.
by that.
He just had a lovely week in Cape Cod.
Yeah.
He's up at the Logan Airport where the weather is terrible, and apparently they've either delayed or canceled the flight.
Well, you know,
So
we
it's
need a better transportation
We do.
system. So that's your next challenge.
Well, okay, so let me tell you, the transporter is.
The teletransporter,
Yeah,
yes.
we have a little problem.
Yeah, I know, it's a very
There's-
hard
Well,
problem.
there's checksum errors. And,
Yeah.
you know,
Yeah, that's how Chris emerged. I went in and she came out.
Yeah, you know, things arrive
It is. Thank
inverted.
you.
Anyway,
much.
thank you very much. Thank you.
You know,
Origin of the internet, right there.
Yeah,
yeah.
Historical.
yeah.
Well,
And even though we're in Washington, that was from the horse's mouth. So speaking of traveling on airplanes, there's a quote in the book that Steve Crocker said that I think is quite apt.
Yeah, so he says our butts must travel before the bits can travel. Our butts must travel. That's what he says. So that you guys had to get together before you could get the computers to connect together.
Yeah, and the Little Garden is a restaurant in Palo Alto. It's hard for me to even say those two words. Palo Alto. But you know, they do come out. Anyhow, that's where Stanford is. But there's a Szechuan restaurant, and basically what Steve told us is he said people have no idea how much of the internet started in that restaurant. You know, and it was grad students. It wasn't the formal bureaucracy. It wasn't a big meeting room. It was grad students who. Steve said something interesting. He said we kept waiting for a grown-up to show up from Washington. That was the best one.
That
We
makes,
just want to wrap up.
Okay.
that makes marriage really, really good. Let me tell you, the
Well,
childlike.
Yeah, if you're going to be a Disney Imagineer, you got to be about 8.
So next
So,
slide.
and Mike Goslin. Okay, so speaking of me, real quick, one of the chapters in the book is the story, and Steve, I think, knows about this, and Brian certainly knows about it. And I just want to say briefly, touch on the point of this about relationships and trust. When I was at Disney, I was Brer Bear, and I had gotten promoted to VP, and so they said you got to understand the entertainment business better. So one of the things I had to do was be Brer Bear and grab, you know, military or cop-looking daddies with little girls and dance with them. You know, good work, good work, good work, good work. And that was what they taught us, by the way, good work, good work. And so that's what I did. And when I got into NSA, I realized we were fighting 2 wars. And like I didn't understand entertainment until I entertained, I understood that we couldn't really help the warfighter until we went downrange. So I did. I used to go up and down Route Irish, which was called the Highway of Death, because we were working on the counter IED project. And I understood that, you know, as Jean Le Carré said, an office is a terrible place from which to see the world. So my theory was I'm going to immerse myself in what's going on downrange so I understand it better so we can help these people better. But something happened on the relationship front that really led to a huge breakthrough in the IEDs. And that was that every day, this battalion that was a Paladin battalion that had nothing to do because there was no one to shoot at except every now and then in Solder City, they had IED transport duty. And I went with them every day, same time of departure, same route, you know, how smart was that? And because we took the same route and the same time, we had issues. You know, people would drop grenades on us, people would, you know, it was not fun. But the good thing about it was it cemented a bond. If any of you have ever been in combat, there's nothing that fosters a relationship like that. And I didn't know that that was going to happen. I didn't want it to happen, but it did happen. And so what I got out of that was the truth. And here's the truth. We had this activity called JADO that we were participating in, the Joint IED Defense Organization. And I said to the lieutenant, if we could get you a device that would go off outside the frag radius of an IED and tell you there's an IED in this quadrant, that quadrant, this quadrant, would you want that? And he goes, oh my God, doctor, when can we have it? And then he looked to his right, where there was a 45-year-old sergeant. And the sergeant was getting all stiff in attitude. And he goes, Sergeant, what is it? And you knew trouble was coming. The sergeant says, permission to speak freely, sir. And he said, yes, go ahead, Sergeant. So the sergeant turns to me and he said, Doctor, that's the dumbest effing idea I ever heard. And he didn't say effing. I said, okay, Sergeant, why? And he said, you're going to get us all killed. He said, you plainly don't get it because the thing's going to go off. The moves you're going to put, they call them the moves, the insurgents. They're going to put these, they know the trigger device is here. They're going to put the payload back where we stop. And we're going to all get killed because we're going to be sitting waiting for EOD. These guys are smart. We've killed all the ones that aren't smart. And so therefore they're going to figure it out. You don't understand, you're going to get us all killed. I said, ooh. And I was thinking, doing the calculus, we had literally spent billions on this thing. That we decided, I just kind of happened to bring it up. And I said, maybe that's not such a good idea. I said, okay, Sergeant, what should we do? And he told me. And I called Ben Cole when I got to the green zone. I said, what about this idea? And he said, oh, we're doing that in Afghanistan. We just tried it. And I can't get into the details of it, but 2 months later, we co-opted and abused the platform that was sitting already in the field. And we started cutting the casualties in half in Anbar province. Not everywhere, but in Anbar province and up around Mosul. And really, to me, the thing that came out of that made that innovation happen was the trust that was built of this intense pressure, this back against the wall. That, anyone who's ever worked with the military knows to get the truth out of a sergeant, if you're like a 3-star general equivalent, which I was, is not easy. And it takes trust and it takes a relationship. And that's the one thing, if any of you are still in the business of supporting warfighters, you really have to get downrange. Because if they don't trust you, and they won't tell you the truth. And without the truth, you can't innovate. So, Bob, we're going to move along here. We're almost done.
Yeah, I know.
Okay,
So now we come down to our innovation equation that we created. We're saying that innovation really equals talent, and we need a lot of talent, plus relationships. Without relationship, you cannot go anywhere. So we need the right relationships at the right time. But we divide it by formality. Yeah. The more formal things are, the less innovation you're going to have.
Why don't you subtract?
The more informal, no divide. The more informality you're going to have, the more innovation you're going to get.
And this comes back to what we think of as the real role of a leader is to foster the informal. And there are all sorts of tricks. Steve Nixon was a genius at it. Brian Hibbeln knows more than I'll ever know. Gary, but that's the key. That's what leaders really are. That they actually subvert their own organization in a way. Funny. That's funny. Okay, so
can I
yeah,
give
so
an example?
yeah.
There's a very well-worked example of exactly this formula. You remember, some of you know about the configure worm. It's been around for quite a long time. An informal group was set up to try to figure out where did it come from and what does it do. The informality part was really important because essentially anybody who knew anything about it was welcome to come and participate in this configure working group. And the informality meant that you didn't have to have credentials, you didn't have to pass some test, you didn't have to have some other clearances or anything else. And so the informality is what made it work. And so I would reinforce this particular formula to say that that's what makes a lot of things work, is not having as much formality. Sir,
speaking of informality.
So so I'll start with the father of sociology, Max Weber, saying bureaucracies compartment information, and they confuse their interest with the national interest. This is father of sociology. What cockroaches did, and it goes back to Vince, what you're saying about informality, is after the CIA and the Navy cryptologic people got together, they said, let's take this to other people we think we can trust. And let's create a group that's informal, that can break down the barriers, and we can always count on them within the bureaucracy. That was what cockroaches
So
was
what-
all
So
about.
Gary, you're talking about cockroaches in the past tense, but, and unbeknownst to you, we are planning a cockroach
I know you
get
are.
together
Well,
sometime
so-
this fall with a speaker to be determined.
So lesson number 17 from tonight is if somebody calls you a cockroach, it's a compliment.
Yeah.
Next slide.
So here, on the one side, we've got on the rock that will represent innovations. On the other side, the other rock is representing the application of the innovation, the successful application and commercialization of the innovation. And in between, there is this big gap. There's a valley of death where most innovations fall. They don't succeed because here we go. And we're saying that in order to make an innovation succeed and become commercialized, the next slide is relationships between people. So between that, you've got a bridge of friendship and relationships. And across that bridge, you cannot drive a Ferrari, but you can for sure drive new ideas across the finish line.
Yeah.
And that's the end of our.
Very
And there's one.
Yeah, right.
Thank you, Dr. Gilbert. There's one more point, and this is where Gwen comes in. Who would do that unless they had good booze in their stomach?
And I noticed they're wearing ties. That's
They're
gotta be a
wearing ties,
mistake.
that's right.
That has to be a mistake.
So thank you all very much.
Thank you all. We
Yeah.
obviously had about 5 USTLC meetings all in one. So bonus points, but the security guard gets time and a half in about a half hour.
Okay.
So let's enjoy fellowship. And thank you both very much for an engaging
Thank you.
and amazing USTLC meeting.